Backbone tonight. A little bit about myself. My name's Sidney Maestre, and I am the platform evangelist for StackMob. And the reason I mention that is because I always like to find out whenever I speak how many people have actually heard of StackMob. So show of hands, have you guys heard of us before? Wow, it's getting better at these meetups. We actually host a few meetups. We've hosted the HTML5 group over at our offices, and I try to get around and speak at conferences and events. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we provide back-end services to help mobile developers build their apps more quickly. We have this really robust, secure, flexible API, and we give you these really easy-to-use SDKs to talk to these APIs. And why do I mention that? Because we actually use Backbone.js as the foundation for our JavaScript SDK. And that was actually fortuitous because I really was looking forward to learning Backbone. So when I joined the company, it gave me an opportunity to learn it. And I found the documentation was a little bit, I won't say it was hard to understand, but sometimes when you're given a full app and you're looking at it, it's a little bit challenging. So what I've done is I've broken it down into its component pieces, and we're going to look at each of the pieces, and then we'll sort of stitch them together in the next 28 minutes. But I couldn't start the talk without mentioning that this is the showdown, the Thunderdome. 3 frameworks enter, only 1 leaves. No, I'm completely joking. I would have my ass handed to me, I'm sure, in that sort of matchup. I'm coming at it from the developer point of view. I'm not a contributor on Backbone. I'm a user of it. And so I just wanted to put my little slide up there because I thought that would be fun. Real quick agenda. We're going to be talking about the what, who's, and whys, models and collections, views and templates, routers, events, and then if there's enough time, just quickly show you how you can leverage StackMob to actually put a little data persistence behind your Backbone application. So what? I think most of us here know what Backbone.js is. It's a model view controller framework. It's for JavaScript for client-side and for building richer client-side experiences. A lot of it is data-driven, so we've got these models and collections that are helping to update our views and give our users these great experiences without having to render it on the server. So why do we want to use a framework like Backbone or one of the other ones that are here tonight? 3 basic reasons. Add better structure to your code, especially if you're working in teams. Being able to reuse your code. Don't repeat yourself. We all know that mantra. And having a separation of roles and concerns between our models and our views, and letting them know what's going on or not letting them know what's going on, depending on what role they're playing. The who. So I include this slide because I think it's good to know who's using these frameworks, just to kind of get an idea of the question of can these frameworks be supported on large projects? And I think by looking at some of the names up here, it's pretty clear that Backbone has a strong community and also has a lot of large applications being built on it. And when I mention community, I also want to just mention that Backbone has a lot of plugins, a lot of people who are building extensions and doing things around Backbone. So that was something that actually initially really drew me in. I'm a big fan of jQuery, and I love the plugin architecture that jQuery built upon, and it really created this ecosystem that us developers can leverage for the apps we're building. If tonight isn't enough for you, there's the MV star is what I like to call it, because these aren't all strictly model view controller patterns, but they all sort of fall into the same family. There's other ones that aren't here tonight. There's lots that you can explore. One way that you can explore them, if you haven't been to the TodoMVC project on GitHub, this is an open source project where a lot of developers have built the same to-do app in all these different MVC frameworks for JavaScript, and it's a nice way for you to get a feel for the different approaches they take. And I think that's important. I think not I'll put it this way, the shoe doesn't fit the same for everybody, right? And these different frameworks come with different opinions and come with different styles, and finding one that fits you and finding the ones that fit the projects you're working on, I think is important. And so I'm happy everyone's here tonight to get a taste of these different frameworks and maybe help you make a decision in the future which one you might leverage. So I've got a little wine app. It's kind of like a to-do app, I guess you could say. And this is what we're going to be working towards tonight as I'm building the different pieces for this app. But before I get into that, I'd just like to touch on how Backbone does its MVC pattern, because it's not totally traditional. But essentially, in MVC, we have a view. It might have a button on it. We might click that button. That button might submit a form. The controller might take the data from that form and then save it into our model. And then ideally what's going to happen is our model doesn't talk to our view, but our view is listening for changes. And when it hears a change in the model, it then says, I'm going to redraw myself. I'm going to re-render myself. And so that's how we separate our models and our views. And we don't want them directly talking to each other, but we do want our views to be listening for changes in our models and collections and re-rendering themselves. So when you add Backbone, it does have some dependencies. You're going to want to include jQuery as well as underscore. Those are both dependencies for Backbone. And I want to start off talking about the model. And the model is the data behind our applications. That's our object, our entities. Anybody have a guess? We've got a theme going on here. We had the Thunderdome, and here we have the matrix we've got for our model. And when we define a new model, we essentially say some variable wine is equal to backbone.model.extend. Now, there's additional options we can add in there, but that's the real basics. That's all you need to declare your model. And then in the next line of code, we're doing first wine equals a new wine, and then we're adding some properties in there. And in this case, we're adding a name, and we're saying Klopagos. So I like to actually see code whenever I do presentations. So here I've got my model, and when I click in there, we get a big white screen because our model is just data. There's no view created yet. But if we wanted to see what was going on behind the scenes, we could say first wine. And Backbone has these nice little helper methods like toJSON, where we can actually take the object and output what its values are as a JSON object. And if we open it up, we can see we have just one property name, and it says Klopagos. Backbone also has some nice getter and setter methods. So if we wanted to, we could say, I just want to get the name property out of there. So we can say first wine dot get, and then pass in whatever the property is we want to get. And we can also do first wine set, and we can put in our name. Whoopsie.
Uh-oh. You might have just jogged your connection there.
Yeah.
Shh.
Type lightly.
Watch where your feet go.
Yeah. All right, I'm not going to type out the whole thing. So if I change it to Robert Mondavi, now if I go and I get the name, it's going to come back as Robert. So that's our collections, our models in a nutshell. The next thing that we want to understand about Backbone is collections. So this is a collection of Star Wars. Very small digression. So last night, I think I had the proudest moment as a father so far. I finally got to watch Star Wars with my 5- and 7-year-olds. They're both girls, and they've been fighting me since they were born because they want to watch princesses, and I got them to watch Star Wars, and I told them about Princess Leia, and they were like really excited. So at the end, they were asking all kinds of questions, like what happens, you know, when does his dad die? Anyways, they kind of know all the secrets though. It's kind of horrible, but I'm looking forward to seeing the other movies with them. So collections, that's my digression. So now we want to create a collection, and so to create a collection, we actually need a model. So we need our sort of our blueprint, our entity for our collection, which is going to be an array of models. So all you do is you pass in the minimum values here are the name of the model and the URL. And the reason we need to set our URL is because Backbone wants to be RESTful. It wants to have some sort of RESTful endpoint on the back end where it can save its data. And so I'm just putting a £sign in there because I don't have any back-end server that I'm going to be talking to. But if I left that out, it'd throw an error for me. So that's our minimum model. And if we wanted to initialize it, we could actually initialize our model and pass in multiple JSON objects, and then actually display that in our console, and it would output those two wineries. But where it gets interesting is when you start looking and you see, oh, well, we can actually loop over these collections as well. So if I wanted to, I could take my wines and I could say for each of my wines, I'm going to call a function and pass in one argument, which will be that particular model, and then I can do model.getName and actually display that, or maybe render some HTML on my in my application. So for collections here, I'm going to actually, based on our timing here, I'm going to actually just skip over the demo part because I don't think it's that interesting, and skip over to views. Any James Bond fans out there? I don't know, this may have been one of the worst ones, but anyways, had to keep with the movie theme going here. So we go for define. So now we're going to actually define a view here, and this is our view. It's our home view, and it's backbone.view.extend, and nothing else. I'm not passing any additional arguments. I'm not doing anything else with my view. And I think this one is worth seeing because this is where we actually, got all my notes here, where we actually see something that I was a little bit stumped when I started working with Backbone, and that was how was it drawing my view? How did it get onto my page? Because it wasn't really clear when I was reading through these full applications. And that's because I didn't understand what this little EL was all about. And this is the element property. And you'll notice in my code on the previous screen, I didn't declare an element. I didn't tell it to be a div. And that's because Backbone does that for you by default. You can set that element to anything you want. You can set it to be the body tag if you want. But it's sort of like an empty box. And if you don't declare it, that empty box is going to be a div. And whatever you render for that view will be shoved inside that box. And so that's something that I needed to kind of wrap my head around when I first started getting into Backbone, as well as the fact that there's a $EL as well, which is your jQuery version of this element. So you might want to take that element and append something to it, or remove it, or do something with that element. So having that jQuery version there ahead of time is really helpful. And so here we get into rendering. So the render method is going to be called, you can call it manually, or you can have it called when your view gets initialized. And so in this example, I'm saying this element, and I'm going to append some HTML, and then I'm going to return this. And so here I'm adding that initialize function, and so whenever the new instance of my view gets created, it will call initialize, and it will say this.render, and then it will actually write out that, it will actually create that HTML element for me. So if I go back, and if I initialize and render, I'm like, cool, it initialized and rendered, but hold on a second. Let's go here. Create a new home view here. So there I've got it. It initialized, it rendered. It's not on my screen though. So what's up with that? What's going on with my element? Let's check it out. So we can actually go in and we can see, okay, so my element's there, it's rendering. Well, the problem is that I didn't actually tell it to append it to the DOM anywhere. I didn't say, now append this to the body or do something like that. And so it would be really easy for me to change that by just specifying that the element is going to be the body. And now when I do that, it's going to actually render into my body here. So there it is, it's been rendered to my body, and now I know that the YNAB element is there. And I just want to see what happens here. Oops. Render. If I call render again. And the reason I point this out is because if you're getting started with Backbone and you haven't played around with it yet, you will probably encounter this at some point where things are getting rendered multiple times and you're wondering, what's going on here? I didn't tell it to draw that 4 times onto my screen. And that's because sometimes our render gets triggered multiple times, and often it's because we forgot this item right here in blue where it says this.element empty. So I'm appending it to the body, and if I didn't empty the body first before I re-rendered it into that element, it's going to just keep drawing it again and again into the body. So I was emptying it first and then appending it. And I just want to also mention return this. This was something that, again, when you're brand new, you may not be thinking about, but when you render something and then you say return this, what it allows you to do is then chain methods and get access to properties inside of that method. So I could actually render my view and then say .el, and then after it's been rendered, pull that element out and do something with it. So it's important to have that return this included in our render method. And so now we get into something that that we see a lot, especially if we're doing mobile apps and we're doing things that are data driven with lists and things like that, is the concept of creating a list. So you can tell it to be a specific tag. So I'm saying be an unordered list, and then I want it to empty itself and then append a couple list items here when it gets rendered. And if I go a step further and I combine it with the previous view that I had started with, that home view, I now want to take my home view, I want to render it to the body, and then I want to append onto that body a copy of the list element that's been rendered, and I want to pull the actual element out of it that was rendered. So there's the chaining actually in action there that you'll see quite often in Backbone apps. And I'm going to, I don't think well, show you real quick. We're getting close to getting through this. So here, boom, it renders. There's my app. It says hello, goodbye. Nothing too exciting there. And now we get templates. Are they replicants? Are they templates? I know I'm stretching the metaphor here with my movie posters, but I'm a big fan of Blade Runner. So templates, you can use different templates with Backbone.js. I choose to just use the one that comes with underscore because I'm just building a lot of demo apps for StackMob, and underscore works for my purposes. But for those of you who want to look at other HTML or JavaScript templating engines, there's Mustache, there's Handlebars, and those all work with Backbone. But for the syntax for a template using underscore, you simply declare a script tag. I set it to a type of text template, and then anything you put inside of that angle bracket, % equals, whatever value you put in there, that becomes a variable that you can then substitute values into. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. When I initialize my list view, I'm grabbing the HTML that's inside of that template, and then I'm going in here and I'm appending it to the element saying this template, and I'm passing in a JSON object. And the only value I'm passing in is hello Backbone. And then now we sort of see things coming together. We get the collections where we have a collection of wines and we want to loop over each of those wines. And when we loop over it, we're going to pass in our model, which I'm calling wine, is our one argument. And then I'm doing an append to the current listView element. I'm taking the template and I'm passing in wine.toJSON, which is the JSON object for that model. If I go into templates here, I'm actually creating 2 wine models and adding them to a collection. And then when I hit this view, it's actually going and rendering those out for me. And the last part or second to last, if you don't count events, is routes. Routes are a way of maintaining state. And this is something maybe I didn't mention at the beginning, is that a lot of these things are optional, meaning that some people just use the models and the collections in their projects. Some people want to use the full stack of what Backbone offers. Routes is just a way of maintaining state. I do a lot of work with jQuery Mobile, and you have a choice. jQuery Mobile has its own way of maintaining state, or you can disable it and use Backbone to handle your routing from one page to the next or from one view to the next. So when you want to start a new route, you put it in your document.ready method, and you say YNAP equals new app router, and then you can set it to start the history so it'll keep track when you go forwards and backwards in the browser. And this is an example of what some basic routes might look like. I have the home route, which is just the /. I have an add and I have a close, and essentially all I'm doing is I'm saying render the view for each of these routes. If I go to the home, render the home. If I go to the add, render the add view. To look at that. And so now we get into this concept of fragments, because when we think of views, we don't want to think of views as the whole browser screen. We want to think of anything can be any visual element can be a view. A form can be a view. A list on the left side can be a view. A button can be a view itself. So all these different things can be your views, and you can load them dynamically using routes. And so here's my route. I come over here, I click on Add New Wine, and it brings up my form. And if I hit Cancel, it's going to go back to my home. And it's not reloading my whole page. It's simply refreshing. It's just reloading the view inside of this part of the page based on the CSS class that I'm targeting. So I don't know if this is, if I'm at the right part of the demo here, but if I say add, nope, we're not there yet. That's the last piece here. Events. So when we get to events, we can do a click event on the add button, and we can create our own custom functions, and we can say, when you click on the add button, call this function, and here I'm just outputting the value of the form. Here I've got my, I'm going to bring it all together. This is my wine. I'm going to set up my wine model, create a set of new wines. And then in my add method, I'm actually going to say wines.addNewWine. So I'm actually going to grab the value out of the form, create a new instance of the model, pass it in as an argument into my collection, and say add that, and then clear out the form. And then on the left side, or actually in the home view, when I instantiate my list view, I'm going to pass in my wines as a collection. Again, this was something that took me a little while to kind of get my head around, is that when you're creating your views, you can pass in a collection, you can pass in a router, you can pass in a model, and then you can go in and use those later on. So here I'm rendering my list view into my home page. And then this is the real key. Inside of my list view, I actually am binding for any events that happen on my collection. If something's removed, if something is added to my collection, I then want to re-render this view, this list view. And so here's the last one. I go in here, I say add a new wine, and I can say, I'll just say hello, and I can say add. It adds a new wine over there. I say goodbye, and it adds another one over there on the left. So it's updating the view, it's going back and forth. And I actually went ahead and created an example here with StackMob on the back end. And when I go in here, it's trying to retrieve the wines, but the wine table doesn't exist yet. So when I go in and I say hello, it actually goes off to StackMob and it creates a new schema for me based on what properties I've sent it. So now if I click on hello, it will repopulate the form based on the model that I'm passing over to it, based on which item I've clicked on. And you can see up here, I've got a new route called update, and it's passing in an ID for the object I just created. And to wrap things up, because I think I'm running short on time here, if you want to go and download all of the samples I just walked through and actually see a longer screencast version of this, you can go to this bit.ly URL, free Backbone.js, and you can go ahead and sign up for the course, go through the materials, and get a firmer basis for Backbone.js. I have a lot more material, but I don't want us to run too late tonight, so I'm going to voluntarily cut myself off and say thank you so much for listening.